Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network, a division of the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network. The following program broadcast is an original creation by the broadcast entity. Discussion within the following broadcast should be used for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice or consultation. Before considering application of any broadcast content in the following program, please consult your healthcare provider. If you feel you are having a medical emergency, please contact your local health services for immediate assistance. MS&Me Media and the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network do not guarantee or warrant the accuracy of information in the broadcast to follow. The Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network provisions broadcast services to program hosts. Information discussed in the broadcast does not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or goals of the network and are solely those of the show broadcast host. Should you wish to host a broadcast, please visit our website at msmemedia.com and submit a request to become a program host. We thank you for listening to the MS&Me Radio Network. Enjoy the show. Welcome to MS&Me Interviews. I'm your host, Erica Lyons Richardson. Today's interview is with Dr. Daniel Reich, a physician scientist with the National Institutes of Health, a neurologist and neuroradiologist, director of the Translational Neuroradiology Unit at NINDS, that's the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. In his clinical practice, he cares for patients with multiple sclerosis and other neurological diseases. He also leads several clinical studies focusing on multiple sclerosis. Research in his lab focuses on the use of advanced MRI techniques to understand the sources of disability in multiple sclerosis and on ways of adapting those approaches for research, trials, and patient care. He is particularly interested in harnessing non-invasive imaging modalities to dissect biological mechanisms of tissue damage. In 2016, he won the Baranek Prize for Innovation in MS Research. What did that mean to you personally, Dr. Reich?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk with you. It's an honor to be here on this show.
Oh, it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. So I was honored and humbled to receive the Baranek Prize from the National MS Society, which recognizes the contributions of early career researchers toward MS research. I think the Baranek family was is very interested in encouraging people to go into this field, and so they are looking for people who are trying to sort of break the mold a little bit and go in new directions, and so that's exactly what we've been trying to do in my laboratory at the NIH for the last several years, and it was very flattering to me that work was recognized, and a credit most of all to the junior researchers, the trainees, the graduate students, the postdocs, and others who I work with.
Yes. Now, Dr. Reich, your study, human and non-human primate meninges harbor lymphatic vessels that can be visualized non-invasively by MRI, was recently published in the journal eLife. Your team used advanced imaging techniques to identify drainage tubes. The team discovered lymphatic vessels in the dura, the leathery outer coating of the brain. That may serve to remove waste from the brain. These vessels are known to run alongside blood vessels and provide a route for recirculation of plasma and white blood cells through the body. Are there lymphatic vessels throughout our bodies, and what are their purpose generally?
So that's a great question, and the answer is yes, there are lymphatic vessels throughout our bodies, and they have several purposes, but from the point of view of the brain, two major purposes would be likely to be important. The first, as you mentioned, is this idea of removing waste products, and what's important about that is that when cells anywhere in the body, especially in the brain, do their normal business, which of course involves thinking and perception in the brain, they require a lot of energy, and the chemical reactions generate a lot of waste products that need to be cleared. Just like any process that we do, there's a lot of waste generated that needs to be cleared. And in the body, that's one of the major functions of the lymphatic vessels. Now, that fluid, the lymph, gets cleared through lymph nodes, and there aren't lymph nodes in the brain, but there are many lymph nodes in the neck. And how the fluid gets to the lymph nodes, where it then gets filtered, was unclear. But it's extremely important for diseases like multiple sclerosis that involve inflammation, because in multiple sclerosis, something goes wrong with the way the immune system interacts with the brain. So there needs to be, clearly the connection between the brain and the immune system is important for how MS develops and how it plays out. So we knew that there must be a communication, but how exactly that happened, we didn't quite know until very recently, actually.
So, in theory, Dr. Reich, what significance might your discovery have for multiple sclerosis and other neurological disorders?
So again, it has a lot of relevance for how the immune system of the body interacts with the brain. One of the functions of the immune system is to try to figure out if there's any abnormal, attack on the body, such as might come from a bacteria or a virus or a parasite. But sometimes that process goes wrong, and the immune system attacks normal structures in the body. And in MS, the myelin, the insulation around the nerve cells, the nerve processes, is a target of attack. And that attack involves not just what happens inside the brain, but it also involves the immune system as a whole, the lymph nodes and the other parts of the body that are involved in orchestrating an immune attack, and also in the repair that follows that. And so this connection between the brain and the immune system in the rest of the body, what we call the periphery, must be critical for the development of multiple sclerosis. And until recently, that connection was thought either to happen through. So we knew that there needed to be a clear connection between the brain and the immune system in the rest of the body, and the way that happened really wasn't clear until very recently.
No. Now, when your team was using those advanced techniques, you found that in a quarter to as much as 40% of the people you looked at after the injection with the contrast dye, that it was leaking out of all areas of the brain, more so for people with progressive forms. Why would there be a difference for progressive patients?
That's a great question, and I think you're referring to a study we published a couple of years ago where we were looking. So we were in that study. We were looking at how the contrast dye that's usually used in MRI, gadolinium, leaks out not into the brain. That was already known in multiple sclerosis that can happen when a new plaque forms, but actually around the brain into the meninges, which are the thin membranes that cover the brain and that are really important for how the immune system interacts with the brain. And we found, as you said, that in somewhere between 20 and 40% of people with MS who got our study, that there was evidence of very slightly leaky blood vessels around the brain. And when we saw that, we recognized that this might be related to what had been described in the microscopic literature of MS, that people had looked at the brain under the microscope, and they observed that there was inflammation not just in the brain, but around the brain. And one of the ways that inflammation can be seen on MRI is because it causes some leakiness of blood vessels, and we can detect that with the gadolinium. So we thought perhaps this was the first evidence using MRI, using imaging, of where the inflammation around the brain was, not just inside the brain. So we knew from the microscope studies that there's more inflammation around the brain in people with progressive multiple sclerosis, and there may be a few reasons why that might be the case. And that's indeed what we observed in that study that we're talking about.
It's fascinating. Now, in 1816, an Italian anatomist reported finding the lymphatic vessels on the surface of the brain while dissecting cadavers. But for 2 centuries, it was forgotten until recently. Researchers in the modern era found no evidence of lymphatic system in the brain, leaving some puzzled about how the brain drains the waste, and others to conclude that the brain isn't an exceptional organ. Now, Dr. Reich, why do you believe this discovery eluded the researchers for 2 centuries?
Well, that's a fascinating question. So the Italian physician that you mentioned, by the name of Paolo Mascagni, was really obsessed with the lymphatic system, and he made these really beautiful wax models of the lymphatic system that can be seen at a museum, actually, that's in Vienna now. And he saw them all over the place. But his techniques really just involved kind of, learning patterns and recognizing when he looked at bodies, what he thought might be lymphatic vessels. He really couldn't prove it. And it wasn't just that work was forgotten. In fact, it was to some extent derided. I've found one quote in an article in the scientific literature that describes his work as something like a case of massive overinterpretation in anatomy. But in the modern era, we now have access to ways of looking at microscopic at tissue, at cells under the microscope, at vessels, and looking at the sorts of proteins that are present in and around each cell, and different tissues of the body. For example, the lymphatic vessels, the vessels of the lymph system, they have a different set of proteins, and we can now detect that under the microscope. So 2 years ago, 2 teams, one at the University of Virginia and one in Finland, reported that in mice there were in fact lymphatic vessels that drained the brain, that were present in the membranes over the brain. And so it wasn't such a stretch for us to imagine they may also be present in people and relevant to human disease. So that's the story there. And it's really a case of kind of, new technology enabling the ability to show what others had only speculated.
It's fascinating. It really is. Now, this study was supported by the intramural research programs at the NINDS and the National Cancer Institute, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. Why is cooperation in research for MS in particular so important?
Well, I think that's a great question as well. I think one of the corollaries of modern technology in that was important for making this discovery is that things have become really, really specialized. And so in order to pull off a study, we need to get together people with different kinds of expertise. We can no longer, go into our dissecting rooms and make all the observations ourselves like Dr. Mascagni did 200 years ago. We need to really engage the expertise of people with a wide spectrum of background. So in this case, we had neurosurgeons, neuroradiologists, neurologists, pathologists, and molecular biologists all getting together and pulling together the support of the different entities that are interested in supporting research to end neurological disease, such as the ones you mentioned, and multiple sclerosis in particular, has really become critical to making progress in this area.
Yes. And as a side note, I think you should trademark the term you often use, MRI, microscope. I really love
So,
that term.
thank you.
I think you need to
Yeah, well,
trademark that
I've
one.
been trying to. Well, I've been thinking about, how do you pronounce that, right? Because MR microscope.
Yeah, for MSers, it's a little tongue
microscope.
twister. MRI microscope.
Anybody's ideas are welcome. Just let me know.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
And Dr. Reich, your team's findings indicate that lymphatic vessels may serve as a link between the brain and the immune system. This may have relevance to diseases including multiple sclerosis. What is most fulfilling to you about doing MS research?
There are many things, for sure. But as I've been in the field now for 13 years and counting, and running a lab for 8 of those years. And we have a long way to go, but I'm beginning to see how the work that my team and I and my collaborators have done could lead to new directions of therapies to address unmet needs. For example, the chronic inflammation that continues in the brain even after the therapies, many of the therapies that we currently prescribe for MS. And I'm very hopeful that this sort of work will lead to the ability to arrest and even reverse disability down the road. So that's a major motivator for me. As a scientist who runs a lab, I have to say that another major motivator for me is the ability to mentor young people and junior trainees who are interested in going into this field, and hopefully to inspire some who would not otherwise have gone into this area. And I'm sure the progress they will make down the road will be far greater than mine.
Yes, and I just wanted to say too, for those of us patients living with multiple sclerosis, we very much admire your work, and we are so excited to keep following your continued work. So it's been such a blessing just to read, your last few studies. So personally, I'm very interested in your work.
Well,
Now,
thank you. I
yes.
appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, is the nation's medical research agency. It includes 27 institutes and centers and is a component of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The NIH is the primary federal agency conducting and supporting basic clinical and translational medical research. It is investigating the causes, treatments, and cures for both common and rare diseases. For more information about the NIH and its programs, you can visit www.nih.gov. I wanted to make sure each of you had that resource so you could do continued reading on your own. And Dr. Reich, I really wanted to thank you for joining us here today on the program. And as I stated before, we will be following up on your continued work.
It's my pleasure.
As patients living with multiple sclerosis, we have often heard from peers that they feel that researchers probably already have the cure or know all the answers, and they're just not telling us. And as we can see as we read and research for ourselves, that the brain is a complex and wonderful thing that holds mysteries for centuries upon centuries. And there have been dedicated scientists and physicians looking in to the inner workings of their brain, the disease processes all along, who have to put together these very complex puzzles. The answers do not always come easy, and sometimes they make these discoveries and don't even understand at the time of discovery all of the impacts that those discoveries might have right away. So there has to be continued research, seeking that continued funding and resources. And like Dr. Reich said, the cooperation. There's such complex technology now. However, one center may have certain technology and specialties, and another center, they focus on other specialties and have other technology and equipment. And it's through that cooperation that we're getting all of the leaps and bounds in MS treatment that we are seeing. We saw that at ECTRIMS this year. Just the amount of research, discovery, and new treatments that is coming out is almost overwhelming going through all the material. If you're being a patient care advocate for yourself, it can be overwhelming going through all of the research and all of the new treatments and knowing which path might be right for you, working with your care team, all your clinicians. So we hope to continue to help you unlock all of this amazing information that's coming out now. And we will continue to follow Dr. Reich's amazing research on the lymphatic system. As patients, we often make these queries to ourselves as we are reading test results, talking over things with our care team. Years ago, a good MS friend of mine, Heather, and I were discussing our old MRIs. She and I have both had MS from a very early age. And we were discussing things that were not always pointed out by our clinician from some old MRIs from the old days. And we were noticing that we had similar symptoms from childhood. Our lymph nodes were always swollen. We commonly had enlarged lymph nodes. And we were noticing that if we went back onto the reports of old MRIs, that it was mentioning on some of the scans our enlarged lymph nodes in our neck, cysts that they would find, nodules on our salivary glands, and different glands having issues. And the glandular and lymph system was fascinating to us, and we thought, is there a key there? Is there some kind of connection that's been missed somewhere along the way? So patients themselves often bring up these questions, and it's fascinating when we start seeing research match our questions and start to unravel those puzzles for us. So we will continue, like I said, to follow the amazing research that is going on at the NIH. They, for so many years, have just made amazing discoveries. And when they get that cooperation going, like they have, like with MS Society and all the different agencies, that's when things really move forward. So it's a very exciting time. Now, one of the best places for you guys to follow up on the new information that comes out is on our front end patient portal. Our website is www.msandmemedia.com. That's www.msandmemedia.com. We will also write an article to go along with this research, so you will have the links to Dr. Reich's work. We will put the video on there produced for you by the MS Society with Dr. Reich speaking, explaining some of his research, and it's sometimes easier for you to get the visual. That way, we are some of us visual learners with our cognitive issues. So we'll get you all the information we can so you can be your own care advocate and do your own research. So please join us again next week when we will be speaking with another researcher, and we'll also be getting more patient views along the way as we go over all of this research. It's just fascinating this year. If you have a particular subject that you would love us to cover, something that you don't quite understand, please submit those questions to us. You can email me at msandmeradio@gmail.com. That's msandmeradio@gmail.com. We appreciate all of your feedback. And don't forget our other weekly show, #AskMSandMe. So on all your social media, if you have an MS or research related question, please submit it to us for us to cover. We will answer it live on that show, or of course seek out the researcher, scientist, clinician who can answer your questions for themselves. So go ahead and use hashtag Ask MS&Me on all your social media to submit your questions. You can also message us on all of our other social media and, of course, through our email address. We really want to bring you the information that you seek in your personal journey, especially at a time like this when information just seems to be coming out every week. New, amazing, wonderful treatments and information. And we would love to bring that to you and break it down for you in a way that's more easy to understand. So once again, visit our website at www.msmemedia.com. If you ever need our radio schedule of our shows, if you want to re-listen to some information to go over it again, you can go to radio.msgsn.com and you can get our schedule for our upcoming shows. You can also go on there and read articles about our wonderful host for all the shows on MS&Me Radio. So tune in again next week and we will try to bring you more information to help you become your best care advocate. Thank you all for joining me today. I am Erica Lyons Richardson.